After a decade-long battle with cancer, Peter Tork of the Monkees dies at 77. On this episode of the Pop 100, we honor the very first pop marketing band, the Monkees. And if you're asking what could you possibly glean from a Beatles ripoff pop band from the late 1960s, oh ye of little faith, stay tuned. The Monkees TV show aired from 1966 to 1968. It's nuts to think about how much culture they jam-packed into those 2 years. They released 4 albums, went on an international band tour, began creating what Criterion called the most psychedelic film of the 1960s. They introduced the U.S. to, Jimi Hendrix, who was their opening act in 67, kid you not. There was the car, the Monkey Mobile, which is totally awesome, but a pop marketing story for another time. They inspired Gene Roddenberry to introduce the character of Chekhov in Star Trek in response to the popularity of Davy Jones, of course. Were credited as pioneers of MTV and the concept of music videos in general. And finally, they paved the way for every boy band that followed in their wake. We're talking New Kids, NSYNC, One Direction, all a large part of the creative freedoms that they now have to the group known as the Monkees, baby. In 1965, 2 LA producers, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, inspired by the Beatles film, The Hard Day's Night, pitched a TV show that followed a fake band around the world. If it worked, they'd have direct control of this make-believe band, giving them complete control of, everything. Sponsorships, the merchandise, the music that came from the show, all cream on top and all belonging to the creators. All they needed was, some dirty hippies. They found their frontman first. That was Davy Jones, a rising British actor that had won some Tonys. Hey, whatever. He was British. He could sing. Check and check. Next. To find the rest of the band, they did what anybody would. They put an ad in the Hollywood Reporter. Who came back was Peter Tork, Mickey Dolenz, and Mike Naismith. Their powers combined, you got yourself a folk rock bubblegum pop boy group for the ages. All right, the plan was simple. To the creators, this wasn't a band they were creating. It was a TV show with actors. And by separating the show from the music, they would apply focus on each at the same time. The guys could focus on the show, while the studio musicians and writers focused on the music. In fact, the Monkees only laid down vocals on the first 2 albums. They didn't play the music because it was a show about a fake band, right? The first album dropped a few weeks after the show's premiere. It spent 13 weeks at number 1 on the billboards and 78 weeks straight on the charts. It's pretty big. The Monkees, both the TV show and music, were a massive hit from the get, and the plan was a screaming success for the creators. So how could a success this large only stay in the zeitgeist for 2 years? What happened that led to such a sharp decline in attention? I'm glad you asked. The creators made 2 large mistakes that ultimately doomed the Monkees and seeded that fall from grace. The first was a decision to release the first album with 0 mention of other musicians and creators involved in the production. It's kind of innocent. It's not a lie, more of an omission. The youth just wouldn't get it. You see, these wizards behind the curtain took it upon themselves to create a more, seamless narrative. We're all pretending here, right? It's a much easier pill to swallow. Just say that the boys did everything. Well, this little action would be the beginning of the end. We are creatures of story. The thing that makes us human is our somewhat magical ability to suspend belief, to let go of logic and believe that a TV show or a movie or even a game is real, pseudo-real. We as an audience are willing participants. When an audience sees a magic show, for instance, they know that the woman or man on stage is not a real sorcerer. It's an incredible and powerful contract between the creator and the consumer. It gets inked right there in real time. And herein lies the first pop marketing lesson of the day. Never take the relationship you share with your consumer and the audience for granted. Young or old, your audience is willing and able to suspend belief as long as you are honest with them. They don't need you to dumb it down or to spoon feed it to them. Yes, the audience will suspend belief. They'll cry, laugh, gasp in horror, but don't you dare break that contract. If the creators would have just been open with the way the music was created, giving credit to the musicians and artists involved in the background, it would have been another story. Instead, the guys were judged as Milli Vanillis, traitors of the art. The guys were torn to shreds by the critics who called them the Prefab Four, which, though funny, was deeply affected their personal perception as well as their perception of the world. The second mistake is directly connected to the first. You see, the creators didn't just believe they were smarter than the audience, but smarter than the talent and the guys themselves. The guys didn't know what they were and were as surprised by the record not mentioning the other artists as the audience were. We're talking youth culture in the late 60s, people. What the hell do you think they're going to do? They rebelled. They wanted to become a real band and fought their creators. They learned instruments between the takes of the TV show and valiantly, by the third album, were doing all the music themselves. However, the damage was already done. The group did unshackle themselves from their creators and become a real, live, living band. But in the battle, they lost the war, falling out of trend. It's really not as tragic as a story as it kind of sounds. The Monkees are a pop culture icon. Even 50 years later, they were touring to sold-out audiences. They were fighters that were complete strangers to each other, and they proved their creators wrong. This Peter Tork quote from 2016 interview with The Telegraph sums it really, really up well for me. He says, "This is not a band. It's an entertainment operation whose function is monkey music." It took me a while to get to grips with that, but what a great music it turned out to be, and what a wild and wonderful trip it has taken us on. So the lessons here for us marketers is that though it's completely possible to create culture and to make a band, you got to do two things. One, never underestimate your audience, especially if it's the youth of America, and always bring your influencers or talent along for the ride. Articulate the situation at the upfront, listen and co-create from the beginning, and once you let it go into the real world, it's much more likely not to turn around and bite your hand off. Well, cheer up, Sleepy Jean. This is Joe Cox, a pop marketer and the ultimate daydream believer, thanking you for tuning in, reminding you to visit pop-marketer.com for more pop marketing goodness, and sign up to my weekly Zeitgeist email to get more pop marketing news delivered to your inbox every couple of weeks. Until then,